thank you for taking the time to speak to us. Everyone that's watching, this is Jock Breitweiser. He's our industry mentor for our master's project this year. And he'll be coming in to speak to our class on November 30th. Jock, could you introduce us? Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where did you go to school?
Sure thing. Yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity to have me. And I'm really looking forward to participating in that session on the 30th. And Kris, yeah, great question. Just maybe starting with a little bit of background. As you can tell from my heavy Texan accent, I did not grow up in the US. So I've been living in the US for about 20 years now. I came to the US in 2001, but originally grew up in Germany and worked in communications there for a couple of years in PR agencies. So I started my career out after a number of internships, and then I started working at a global PR firm called Edelman. Worked for them for a couple of years, and then started working with a company called EuroRSTG. Worked for them, and then eventually decided that I wanted to make a change in my career path, and started working for an agency that's based in San Jose. So I essentially just took a leap and went through a number of applications in 2001, and was lucky enough to score a job offer with that agency in San Jose. Worked for them until 2005, and then eventually moved over to the corporate side and have been working on a number of corporations ever since. So some in-house and some agency experience.
Nice. I saw on your LinkedIn that you had a master's degree in political science. Is that in history? Is that true?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So my formal education is that I have a master's degree in contemporary history, and then public law and political sciences. And that was, yeah, that, at the time when I went to start my college education, journalism and public relations were not really great options. And so I spoke to a number of friends and advisors that I had, and still have, actually, still the same people. And they said, look, the best thing you can do probably is to get a really good general education and then acquire additional skills through internships. And that's exactly what I did. So, I went to study history, and I thought the combination of what I studied between history, public law, and political sciences was particularly interesting because it allows you to look at specific periods of time from three different angles, but different angles, but and very different perspectives, but you get a pretty comprehensive view, and it gives you a pretty good formal education and relatively strong general knowledge. And that allows you to do everything and nothing, right? So, that, yeah, it worked out really well for me because I was able to do a number of internships during my studies, and then was able to actually transition very seamlessly from, completing my degree directly into full-time employment.
Wow, that's really wonderful, Jock. Could you explain to us what your experience was like doing those internships? Because right now, in the environment that we live in, there's a lot of internships that are unpaid. They believe that they're paying with experience. Was that your experience when you were doing the internships?
Yeah, that was exactly my experience too. So I think, if I remember correctly, I did a total of, I want to say, 6 or 7 internships, and so all of which were unpaid, at least formally. And then some of them said, throughout the internship, they said, hey, this is great, and we at least want to show some appreciation, and so here's here's some financial some financial support. But to me, the internships were an opportunity to get a foot in the door. And so I was more keen on getting that experience and making the relationships rather than seeing them as an opportunity to make money. I made money when throughout my college time, really by having side jobs and working throughout the semester allowed me to essentially set monies aside so that I could afford the internships.
Yeah, that's what a lot of our students are doing right now, and they're trying to find that balance, which can be challenging, especially when, especially living in the Bay Area, the high cost of living and everything associated with that. But it's good to hear that I've never met anyone that did more than, I think, 2 or 3 internships. So my hat goes off to you. Well, then bring us to the present. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, who you're working for, what you're doing, what your kind of day-to-day looks like?
Yeah, sure thing. So I work for a company called StorageCraft, and my title is Senior Director, MarCom and PR. And the work that I do is overseeing a small team that really manages the entire internal and external communication and perception of the company, right? So depending on where you end up and what the organization looks like, and also what the team looks like that you work with, your responsibilities may vary. And I think as an individual, you always have a great opportunity to carve out a specific niche and a specific role that you want, right? Exactly because of the fact that in many organizations, the comms or MarCom piece is vaguely described, and there's usually some leeway within that. So with that being said, the activities that we deliver against are the classic ones that you would expect, right? So public relations, analyst relations, social media, right? Paid social to some extent, but certainly the owned. And then there's also a component of content creation, right? So where my team actually creates content that goes much beyond just what we directly use, but that content is then being repackaged and reshared, redistributed within the marketing team. So that it becomes useful for other parts of marketing, be that lead generation or product marketing, for example. And then in addition to that, what we do is customer references. So customer references in written form or as videos. And then we do internal communications. So internal communications meaning newsletters, emails, updates, those kinds of things. We also are responsible for the blog. So our blog obviously is an ongoing flow of content, and that generates a pretty high volume of visitors. I think we have 80,000 visitors a month on the blog, so not completely irrelevant. And then there's like little bits and bobs, so to speak, right? There's like elements where the rest of the marketing and I collaborate on, let's say, creating letters that need to go out to customers, to partners, etc. Right? And that's not necessarily a structured kind of, this is what you do, but it depends a little bit on the scenario. Sometimes I will lead this with my team, sometimes somebody else in marketing will lead it, but we all collaborate on those things.
And right now, Jock, are you guys working in an office? Or are you guys working remotely?
It's all remote. As an organization, we were pretty far ahead. Our headquarters are in Draper, Utah, and I was there last time mid-February. And back then, we already had a crisis team set up, and we got together and we had our plan together, and our our feeling was that things would probably get worse. And so we, we escalated pretty quickly, and we already had decided as an organization, as a company, that we would have alternating A and B teams, I think a week ahead of the lockdown that started in California. And so by the time the lockdown came, we already had decided 2 days ahead of that, or 3 days ahead of that, that from our side, nobody would go to offices anymore, be that in the US or in any of our other locations worldwide. And so we were definitely ahead of that. And that stance hasn't changed since then. So ever since then, everybody in all of our global locations has been working offsite. And there are exceptions, right? So sometimes somebody will have to go in to update a server or something like that. But yeah, it's been pretty interesting, So we don't have any plans to go back anytime soon. We will revisit this probably at the beginning of the year again to see where things are and make a new determination. But for the time being, yeah, it's everything's remote, and it's actually been working interestingly enough. So productivity across the board, when we speak to our managers and team leaders, they say productivity is actually up. And that's obviously great, but there's more to work than just productivity, right? And so that component of actually being a team together, that is suffering a little bit, obviously. So we're trying our best to address that, but it's not easy.
That was actually what I was going to talk to you about, because students nowadays, they're losing motivation, they're losing, they're anxious, we're living in uncertain times. Are you guys facing the same thing? Are your teams kind of losing motivation, morale, and how do you tackle that?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is obviously, the interconnectedness between team members and being able to have meaningful relationships that go beyond just checking off boxes of deliverables. And I would say we're doing relatively well. We have an internal team that is driven by some of our organizational folks who really make a great effort to keep people engaged. And we have photo contests and things like that actually spark creativity and allow people to share a slice of their personal life that goes beyond just the things that are being discussed typically during work meetings, right? So whether that's putting together a company cookbook or having a virtual Halloween contest, or during the summer we had photo contests from folks who went on vacation, and everybody was able to show and share where they spent their time. Those things are obviously a little bit more creative, and they also help spark conversations about, hey, I saw you were in vacation there and there. That looked really awesome. What was your experience, right? So it helps drive conversations that go beyond just the day-to-day routine of work. But yeah, I mean, it's no doubt it is challenging, right? And I think to some extent, these little creative crutches can only go so far, right? Yeah. So I think everybody also has to have their own personal social ecosystem in order to stay sane and not just become really frustrated with the times the way they are. So it's certainly a challenge, absolutely.
Given that, and that you think that we might be kind of in this situation for a while, it looks like we'll probably graduate into this situation. What do you think the industry is going to look like for us in terms of hiring, in terms of, the job market? Yeah,
you know what? I think that situation is going to be very different, right? And it's not just for you. as graduating students, right, it's also for people who are currently in the job market, of course, right, and who have been hit by the pandemic and where maybe companies had to let go of people. And it definitely makes the application process and the interview process very different. That's not to say, though, that it doesn't work, right? And I think as communicators, you actually have a leg up, and I think you have a much better sense for how to present yourselves than many others have, right? And I think that's really something to see as a strength and to play on that. And I would say it also offers up great new opportunities. I mean, I always try to look at the positive side of things because that's all we have, I think. And sure, is it difficult and is it challenging? Sure, but I think you can also have fun with that, right? And you can play around with different ways of identifying job opportunities. And also it's a different playing field right now because everybody is digital, right? There is nothing that allows people maybe to, for the most part, to meet in person. And so just like you, everybody else will have to apply online. They have to go through a video or email application process, right? So all of those things are, I think, much more equal for a lot of people than what they were before. I think the downside, of course, is you're not going to be able to play on your personality as well, right? So if you're meeting somebody in person, there is a different quality to the conversation, no doubt, right? And you can sense, do you have the right vibe, and do you jive with someone, right? Is there a connection there? And you don't get that same feeling over a screen. So that's certainly a shortcoming. But I think at the same time, it also forces you to think about how you present yourself and have a kind of structure in mind that goes beyond just sitting in an interview room, but you actually have to come to the presentation or to presenting yourself in a slightly different way, where you really have to talk more about how you do the job or what you contribute specifically, rather than talking about the job. Because I find always when you're in an interview situation, you have that personal back and forth, right? And everybody is kind of feeling out the situation a little bit. And with that pretty much out of the equation, you come to brass tacks very quickly, right? And I think you have to be prepared for that, and you really have to think through your structured approach of what do I actually bring to the table, and how do I actually tell somebody what I have to offer, right? And so that is particularly challenging. And so thinking about that in a structured way, and maybe coming into interview situations specifically with a 30, 60, 90-day plan, and to say, hey, here's what I know about you, and my assumptions may be wrong, but here's, based on what I know and what I was able to see from the outside, here's how I think I can help. Here's how I can contribute to your team, to your business, and here's where my value is. And I think that it takes a lot of the fluff out of those conversations, right? It makes it harder, but it also it challenges you in a positive way to really put something on paper and come into these conversations in a structured way.
That's really good advice, Jock. Thank you. Speaking of that, it sounds like almost that we have to begin branding ourselves, right? In not just for a specific job, but just what we're able to offer. So when it comes to that, what do you recommend? Because now I'm seeing kind of a spike in people creating personal websites, right? We're kind of transitioning from, I mean, LinkedIn is still very much used, and so is social media to get hired. But I see that people are creating brands, websites. What is your take on that? Do you think that's a good approach?
I 100% think so. Yeah, and I think there's that's kind of in my mind what I was referring to when I spoke about the opportunities earlier. I think that it's a fantastic opportunity actually to go out and present yourself and build your personal brand, right? And it does take some structure, and it does take getting yourself over that hump, right? And I mean, it really depends on your personality. For myself, you know, I found that really hard to put myself out there and present myself, you know, on certain platforms, just because it's not necessarily my thing, right? So I'm personally a little bit more introvert, right? I don't necessarily go out and I don't, you know, I like conversations, but I prefer conversations to be one-on-one, and to be able to really have a strong and close relationship and be very targeted in those conversations and be very specific. Whereas when you go out and present yourself on a broader platform like LinkedIn, for instance, you address a much bigger audience potentially. And so that poses the question, how do you address a bigger audience, right? So aside from the fact that maybe you may not be comfortable doing that, right? And maybe it makes you nervous, but at the same time, it also forces you to think about what kind of content do I want to put out there, about myself, and what kind of content is going to be interesting for a broader group of people. And I think there's some soul searching involved, and I think there are ways to come up with a great concept, right? So I think you have to make your own decision how much personality you want to bring into those kinds of things, and how much you want to share about your personal life. I do think that can be a huge advantage, but you have to be comfortable doing that. And I think beyond that, even if you just box it into the professional realm, and you want to build your professional brand, you can absolutely do that, right? And with the way to do it by essentially segmenting out specific topics, you can be very targeted, right? So you can think about specific topics inside your career aspirations that you feel strongly about, and you can really drill into that topic and really look at it from a number of different angles, right? And I always find that when you have to explain something to others, you also learn in that process, right? And you have to be better than the people that you explain it to. And it forces you to really think through it on a deeper level. So I think picking out a segment that you feel passionate about is probably the best way, right? Because passion definitely comes through. If you feel strongly about a topic and you feel this is something that really represents yourself, that is what I would focus on. And the platform of your choice, you know, obviously you take your pick, but I think, you know, when we talk about job opportunities and when we think about career development, LinkedIn is a great platform, and it offers up a lot of opportunities when you think about what it has offered in the past, and how it was really more sort of like a virtual resume, whereas today it becomes almost the Facebook for professionals, right? And I think I've seen a lot of really interesting developments there where people start doing mashups, you know, where they start using TikTok style videos on LinkedIn, right? And I think that's a really cool idea, right? So coming up with ways how you can mix up styles where you don't have nobody tells you how you have to do an article on LinkedIn, or what a video on LinkedIn has to show, right? I mean, it's your job to break it, right? And honestly, just to test the limit and see what happens, right? And if you get a warning from LinkedIn, I would take that as honestly, I would take that as a badge of honor, right? I mean, you don't want to push it too far, but I think, you know, you want to test out the limits, right? Because if you always and constantly stay inside those limits, then, you know, it means you're just like everybody else, right? And so testing those limits out a little bit, and not just getting applause from everybody, but also getting critical voices, is something that you should aspire to. You know, you don't need to please everybody. And I think that's where, you know, where you can make statements on LinkedIn, whether that's a video or, you know, whether it's an article, that allow you to push that norm and that allow you to carve out that niche for yourself, right? And I think as long as you do it in a smart way, and I think that's the important thing, right? Be smart about be smart about the risks that you take, you know, take calculated risks, but also, you know, try to not be mainstream on those things, right? Because you, like you said, you want to build a brand, and if you just go mainstream, you know, you're never going to be avant-garde or anything like that, right? That's, you know, so you have to make your personal choices.
Right. No, and that's wonderful advice, because I think right now too, we're at a stage in our careers, especially as students, where we're learning the rules, but we're also learning how to step out of the box. But one of the things that students are struggling with is imposter syndrome. You know, they're struggling to step out of the box because they're starting to question themselves. Are they worthy of being there? Do they have the right knowledge? So we're seeing an increase in imposter syndrome. And I'm thinking that that might be more of a hindrance when we ask people to think outside the box. It would almost be comforting to go in the mainstream direction when you're suffering from something like that.
Yeah.
Do you have any experience with imposter syndrome? Does your team struggle with it? And if so, how do you cope?
Yeah, I would say that's, of course, it's a lot easier, right? And if you are in that if you are in that mainstream kind of direction, then you know, you take less risk of being attacked or being singled out. But again, you know, everybody can take, you know, the main highway, right? But it's, so I think for your personal development, as well as for, you know, for your ability to actually stand out and come up with new approaches, yeah, that, you know, you have to push the envelope. You just have to, right? It's otherwise, yeah, I mean, you're just gonna blend in, and you're gonna be one in a sea of sameness.
Yeah.
And you know that it's not gonna make it easier with your ultimate goal to, you know, sure, find a job, right? But it's not about finding a job. It's about finding something that fulfills you, right? And I think it's that same kind of approach applies to whatever you do, right? So if you go out and if you just apply to the jobs that are out there with job postings, I think you limit yourself to something, you know, that's everybody goes, right? Everybody looks like, okay, what is the job posting that is out there? And then you have 500 people applying to it. Great, right? But I think what you want to do is you want to say, what am I passionate about? Where do I want to go? And then either single out an organization or a path that you want to pursue, and approach people that you feel represent that path, right? So whether that's a company, and you say, I love that company and what everything they stand for and everything that they do is just exactly where I want to go. And then I think you should apply there, right? And you should, you know, identify what department you want to be at, and you want to find ways how to identify the people that are working there, specifically the individuals, and use those mediums that are out there, whether it's, you know, LinkedIn or any other platform, where those individuals are, and go to them and say, hey, I know you don't have a job written out right now, but here's who I am, here's what I do, and I would love to be part of it. What do you need from me, right? And how can I contribute, right? And, or here's what I can contribute. Is this of interest? I would love to have a conversation, right? So I think that's ultimately, to me, that's much more impressive than, you know, just putting out a job and getting like an avalanche of applicants back, right? Which is what everybody is going through. And And I do think everything that I've seen in my career is many people hire for fit and not necessarily for need, right? So there's a lot of opportunity out there that is maybe not even documented in a formal job posting, right?
Yeah.
It's where people look for great team members, and if you have a great candidate, then you will hire that person, and you will say, you know what, we're going to find a way to deploy you, because you're just exactly what our organization needs, right? And whether that's a role that needs to be created, or whether it's something that's that just happens to be open. But I think I wouldn't wait for that official channel necessarily to open up. And I think it's honestly the same for whatever you do. And there's always a level of lack of comfort, I guess, right? Because you're reaching out to somebody who's not even asking for your application, or it forces you maybe to make a decision, and you say, you know what, as I'm looking into this, and as I'm looking into the professional world, here's what I want to do, but that doesn't exist. And so I have to carve out my own niche, and I have to create something that isn't even there, which creates a lot of uncertainty, right? But I think that level of uncertainty never goes away, right? And I think that's where the creativity and where the passion have to come through. So where you just have to jump over that cliff and take the plunge, and I think there's the less dependencies you have, you don't typically, the majority of you will not have a family, right? You will not have children that depend on you for college or something like that, right? And so I think that can also be liberating, right? Because what's the worst that can happen, right? I mean, you're gonna fail, and so you just gonna pick yourself up, you dust off your shoulders, and you start over, right? And you just do it again. It's not like you're gonna fail and you're gonna be a failure for the rest of your life, right? It's that doesn't typically happen, right? If you're smart, if you have your head together, and if you know what you want, and if you know there's a reason why you want it, right? That's that calculated risk, right? When you put yourself out there and you make a crazy statement, let's say on LinkedIn, and you say everything that has been done in communications today is BS, and here's why, right? As long as you can back it up and you thought it through, it doesn't matter if people disagree with you, right? It's just a matter of being able to reason and come up with a justification of why you think that, right? And if people agree with you, that's great. But if they don't, you just make your argument, and maybe you learn something, or maybe you convince someone. But you don't necessarily have to comply with everything that is out there. Just because there's certain structures doesn't mean you have to fit into those.
I think it's really good to hear that, because sometimes we think that ourselves. I mean, I myself personally do, but then you get kind of roped into the easy path, especially as a student. But it's great that you are encouraging us to step outside of the box.
Yeah. And honestly, I think I mean, I was not always old, right? So, I remember really well, the times when I started to transition from school to college, right? Or when I transitioned from college to job, right? And there's always reasons why you want to go the safe path, right? And there's always a good reason why you want to do that, right? Because it's less resistance and it's less risk, right? And it just really comes down to, what kind of risk do you want to take, and how big is the downside? Is it going to be catastrophic, right? Or is it just going to be, okay, this is a setback, and then I'm going to recalibrate, and then I'm going to do it differently, right? So I think you pick your battles, and everybody has their own level of risk tolerance. But that's a decision that nobody can make for you. But I definitely think you have friends, right? You have parents, you have a social network, right? That is willing to come out and support you, especially in tough times. And so sometimes taking that risk again, and figuring out, what's the worst that can happen, and then just going for it is not a bad thing.
Thank you, Jock. That's very, very well said. And we're going to save some questions for next week. That way we don't answer everything possible. So we're just going to tie a bow on that. I want to circle back to when you said you came to the United States, which was in 2001. How was the atmosphere when you came here? I mean, especially after everything that happened with 9/11.
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. And that is, to me, it was a really, really interesting experience, because I think you see the true nature of things when things are tough, right? And when not everything is just easy, and the US and most of the world had just gone through this incredible economy, right? And then things had come down. But I think it was a really interesting time to see how people in the US would welcome strangers, right, that had not grown up here and that had maybe that weird Texan accent. And so that's a memory and something that I definitely tap back into a lot, right? And I think back to that relatively regularly, because it was a time of great uncertainty, and nobody knew where things would be going, right, and how far things would be escalating. And it was interesting to see how open and welcoming people were, right, towards somebody that they didn't know. Obviously, I fit well into the stereotype, right, of not being a stranger, right, in terms of skin color and education and all of these things, right? So that certainly makes it easier. And I see, how that experience does not necessarily apply to everybody during that time, or any time of that is being challenged, right? So I think my perspective on that is somewhat limited, but I think what I've seen back then was a country that was a lot more united, right, than what maybe we see today. So that's an interesting experience. And there were times when my family and I were going through some tough times, health-wise, and it was really amazing to see how the community, almost came together behind people that they didn't know at all, and supported us, right? It was so that was really impressive to see, and I think it showed me a great slice of what America is, and how it can be. And so that also makes it hard to compare where sometimes we are today, and because some of those fronts have become a little bit harder, and it's there's a lot more conflict than maybe there was back then. But also, I think from a professional side as well, I think the conversations that happened in those days are not too dissimilar maybe from the conversations that happen today, right? Back then it was more of an external enemy, so to speak, right? And today we have like conflicting points of views, and so there's always something, and I think what you just have to keep in mind is time develops, right? And challenges come up and they go away. And the challenge that you perceive as unsurmountable today, you're going to look back at that, 10 years later, and you're going to be like, oh, that was easy. Look at what we have today, right? And so I think sometimes we all have to take a step back collectively and think also, okay, so yes, that it's not easy, right? And there are challenges, but also, is it the end of the world, right? And 20 years from today, how are we going to think about that? And really, take maybe a broader view of those things and put it into perspective, and really say, okay, how can we come over this, and how can we address this in a reasonable way? So, you know, this, it's a complicated topic, but I think there's always something that you learn, and I think that, again, you know, I look at it from a positive perspective. I think there's always something to take away from those moments in terms of learnings where you learn things about people that are of different opinions, right, and that have different backgrounds. So I always try to take the positive things away from that.
Thanks for sharing that, Jock. I'm sure our students will probably have a little bit more follow-up to that experience, so we'll save it for them.
Sounds good, yeah.
So thank you again for joining us.